back just a little bit. That's what we're talking about. Excellent. Is it actual live now?
It's recording now.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to check if it is working online.
All right, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. So, gentlemen, we are here at Parshat Mishpatim, which is the beginning of a whole series of just an ocean of mitzvot that Am Yisrael is commanded to do. And I thought it would be important to kind of take a look at, try to understand what is so important about the mitzvot themselves. Why is this such a big deal? I mean, shouldn't it be that you just have to believe in Hashem and be a good person and that's it? What's the deal here? And that's really the basic question that we can answer by looking at a couple different sources, actually. First, we'll look at the Torah itself. We'll see that there are some hints in the Torah about what the real purposes of the mitzvot are. And then we'll look at a book called Mesilat Yesharim. Are you guys familiar with it? You heard about it? Very important book that goes through the processes of what a person needs to do to go up kind of like a ladder. As he gets better and better in his service of Hashem, he reaches very high levels. And that's what Mesilat Yesharim is all about. And then we'll take a look at Rav Kook, because Rav Kook has an extraordinary chidush, an innovation about this whole topic that we'll take a look at. I did want to just comment for a moment. Tomorrow, the nation is going to be going through an extreme challenge. I don't know if you know, but tomorrow they will be releasing hostages who are no longer alive. That is, hostages in boxes. And they are children, gentlemen. These are children who have been murdered al Kiddush Hashem, for the holiness of Hashem's name. The only reason, the only thing they ever did in their lives was to be born as Jews. And this is why they were murdered. And this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who murder, not something new, of course, who murder people because they're Jews. And this is going to be a shock to the nation because we're going to see right in front of us what these people did. I think it's very, very important to keep in mind that there's a bill to pay. But these people, for what they've done, there's a bill, there's a cheshbon, we say in Hebrew, to pay. And we shouldn't forget for a minute that what they did is an absolute form of evil, which is not something new, but it is an absolute form of evil. And we have to keep that in mind, and it's going to be very, very difficult for us because we're going to be shocked by the sight of being brought to burial. We're in very, very challenging times. And I guess part of what I'm going to speak about is to help us clarify what really are we doing here? Why are we here and why are we going through all these things? And that's kind of a question that will be in the back of your mind as we go. Okay? Begins right after the Ma'amad Har Sinai. Last week we got the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, and then what does the parsha do? What happens? The last word, you would kind of think, after such a monumental occasion, we talk about it, we deal with it. Well, the Torah doesn't waste time. It goes straight into mitzvot, and we'll see that in just a second. Who wants to read this source? Can someone here take a look at the first source and read it? So later, would you like to? we can't handle listening to God's name, and God speak in such a way. We're going to have you listen to God and you tell us what he says. But immediately after that, God says, Atem ra'item ki you saw, you people at the mountain saw that from heaven you. And then I think it'd be a little discussion about that. And there's none. Immediately it jumps into a mitzvah. Mizbach adama ta'aseri. You must make me. You must make me an altar from earth. Okay, but like, whoa, why is that happening? Well, wouldn't I mean? Usually, after something such of great importance happens, there'd be a little bit of maybe bringing you back down to earth. But no, bringing back to earth is to start with a list of mitzvahs, and then our parsha begins. Who wants to read the second set? Go for it.
ואל המשפטים אשר תשים
לפניהם.
כי תפנה עבד עברי שש שניים יעבוד ובשביעית יצא
לחופשי
חינם
עם
בגפו יצא עם בעל אישה ויצא אשתו.
Okay. What are we talking about here, guys? All of a sudden, after coming down from this event, we're talking about the laws of an indentured servant. Like, this is the most mundane thing you can possibly think of. Like, all right, so what's the big deal? How is it that we came from this huge momentous event down to talking about the rules of an indentured servant who has essentially sold himself into servitude? It's not a slave. He is an indentured servant. That means he did something either criminally or he ran out of money, and he basically sold his services as to be a servant to an individual. And there are laws about that, of how that person must be treated. And this is what we're discussing right at the very beginning of the discussion after the Ten Commandments. What does that say? Does someone want to read the English, or is it okay that you can just look at it? It's okay to have it, right? We'll talk, it'll help us if we don't dig into the English deeply, but you'll see what the English is. So there's something going on here. There's something about these mitzvot that are of pretty high value, and they start at the bottom rung. The most simple thing you can possibly think of are the rules of an indentured servant. Like, what's the story here? So let's start exploring what the actual purpose of the mitzvot are. And in fact, the Torah says something to us in Devarim. I'll read this. Says something to us that gives us a hint of what's possibly behind the mitzvot themselves. It says like this. V'haya, this is from the Shema, by the way. We say it every day, twice a day. V'haya, im shamoa tishma'u el mitzvotai. If you listen carefully to my commandments, asher anochi mitzaveh etchem hayom, that I am commanding you today, le'ahava et Adonai Elokechem ule'avdo, to love Hashem, your Lord, and to serve Him. B'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem. So, this is kind of pointing out that the purpose of mitzvot themselves are to connect you as close as possible to Hashem. The mitzvot connect us to Hashem. And we will see, when we look at Mesilat Yesharim, which is a book of Musar, a famous book of Musar, written by Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who was a Talmid Chacham in the early 18th century. He was in Holland. But this book that he wrote has become a classic work on how a person should be working to refine oneself as a person and in his service of Hashem. Because refining oneself as a person is itself service of Hashem, right? So we see here the Mesilat Yesharim. Does someone want to read this a little bit, or even just a sentence or two, and then I'll continue?
No,
Yosef,
I'll read it, yeah.
go for it.
והנה מה שורנו חכמינו
Mm-hmm.
זיכרונם לברכה הוא שהאדם לא נברא אלא להתענג על השם
Right.
ולהינות המזיו שכינתו
Right.
שזוהו התענוג האמיתי והדין הגדול מכל העדונים
Mm-hmm.
שיכולים להימצא.
Let's stop at that for a sec and see what he's trying to tell us. He says, and here, Chachamenu Zichronom Levracha are the sages of the generations. We're talking about the sages who prepared the Mishnah and the Talmud, and they're called Chazal. There's a Roshei Tevot, a acronym for them, Chazal. We're talking about Chazal now. And it says, what Chazal taught us was that a person is created only, the whole purpose of a person is to lihitaneg, ta'anug in Hebrew, and that we get the word oneg, like oneg Shabbat, right? Oneg is inner celebration of a person. The purpose of a person is to celebrate Hashem, to be connected to Hashem and His world. We're not disconnected, we're very connected to the world because Hashem created the world. And we're supposed to enjoy our lives, because enjoying a life in the constraints of the Torah, in the way of the Torah, is a kiddush Hashem. You're sanctifying Hashem by saying, "Hey, your world is good. Your world is good, and it's something to enjoy." And that's not always an obvious thing to see, that we're supposed to celebrate Hashem in our lives. And then it says, "Ulehenot miziv shchinato," and to enjoy the flow of His Shekhinah, which means, where is His Shekhinah? Where's Hashem's Shekhinah? What do you think? It's Eretz Yisrael b'miuchad, but it's everywhere. The Shekhinah is the presence of Hashem. It's His world. He created this world. And one of the things that we'll see a little bit later, we have to assume that we know from the very beginning of the Torah, when He created the world, everything He created was good, and at the last day, it was very good, right? Tov me'od. God and His goodness in creating the world. Now that's a challenge, because sometimes we see bad things in the world, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, right? There's bad stuff going on in the world. But Rav Kook is going to deal with that in a moment. He's going to show us some very interesting things about that. But anyway, says the Mesilat Yesharim, the purpose of a person is to celebrate God in this world. See that? Actually, that's the second part, which we skipped for a second. Aval haderech kedei lehagia el mechov chavtzenu zeh. He says the way to get to this desired thing that we just talked about, to be celebrating Hashem in the world. How do we do that? Can someone read that? I'll read it. Huzeh ha'olam. It's in this world, guys. We're not talking about the world to come, all that stuff. That's something. What the way to celebrate Hashem is in this world, because this is His world. He created it, and we're in it, right? And then look at the next sentence. והאמצעים המגיעים את האדם לתכלית הזה, those means that bring a person to this conclusion, to this purpose, right? Hem HaMitzvot. In other words, the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world for human beings is that he provided human beings with a series of commandments that they're supposed to do, and that is their way of achieving the highest height possible of connecting to Hashem. So in other words, the mitzvot are not just things we do, and it's part of what I have to do that, right? Okay, right. No. The mitzvot themselves as a whole are the very means that we use to connect to Hashem and to celebrate Hashem in His world. Pretty powerful concept. And there are those people who are plugged into this to such a degree that they have something called a Yehi Ratzon, and you'll see it in your Sidurim. It says before you do a certain mitzvah, you say Yehi Ratzon, let it be that this mitzvah should be. There are different purposes, but the idea is these mitzvot that I'm doing, of putting on tefillin, of davening, of learning Torah, right? All these mitzvot add up to bring us closer to Hashem, and then we can even say further, we're helping to correct and perfect the world by these mitzvot. That's what we're here for. So they're not something not to be taken lightly. That's what he's trying to tell us here. Okay? Okay. Let's jump to the next page, and we're going to see that Rav Kook actually speaks in one of his works that are not so well known in the yeshiva world. There's a work. It's in many ways it's considered to be too high level. It's the book Orot HaKodesh is not taught so much in yeshivot, but I promise you, I've been learning it with a teacher for a long time, and I think that some of this stuff is even more important than some of the basic stuff that's taught in the book of Orot, Orot HaTorah. Those are wonderful and very important things. But this is also it's like an icing on the cake, this book, Orot HaKodesh. And I highly recommend that somewhere along your way, you'll have an opportunity to if you hear of a shiur in Orot HaKodesh, I suggest you look into it, because the Rav Kook says amazing things. And they're a little different. The spin is different from the books that we learn in yeshiva here of Rav Kook's. Okay? So the first thing we have here, the first paragraph, is Rav Kook is actually talking about this book, Mesilat Yesharim, and he's echoing the conclusions that we just said a moment ago. Who wants to read that first paragraph?
Number 4.
You see it? It's in 4.
וכשקוראים אנו להלן בספר מסילת ישרים, כי האמצעי אל הדבקות הוא להידבק בו בכוח מעשים שתולדתם זה העניין שהם המצוות.
Right. Okay, so what is it saying here? The translation is down below if you need to see it, but we're going to say, Ukeshikorim anu lahalan. When we read further in the book of Mesilat Yesharim, which we quoted earlier, he says, we see that the means, this is kind of what we spoke about before, the means for dveikut is attachment. Attaching a person, the Rav Kook uses this term to describe, if you're serving Hashem, you're essentially attaching yourself to Hashem and His world. And so the word dveikut is talking about this kind of service, attaching yourself to Hashem. And he says, the means for attaching oneself to Hashem is through the actions of ma'asim, through the power of actions. So what Rav Kook is saying, if you want to connect yourself to Hashem, there are things you do. And then he says, of course, shetoldatam zeh, the results of this process are ha'inyan shehem hamitzvot. So Rav Kook here is echoing exactly what Mesilat Yesharim said. which is that the way to get to attach yourself to Hashem, the way you get to serve Hashem, and the way you get to experience life at its fullest is by performing the mitzvot, because that's what attaches us to Hashem. So now we begin to understand a little bit, why is it so important right after the Ten Commandments, this massive, huge thing, all of a sudden we're talking about very basic mitzvot, because that's the way we attach ourselves to Hashem, by doing these mitzvot. By the way, we should note that we do them as individuals, right? Every individual is involved in doing mitzvot. But we also do things as a nation, which is one of the things you mentioned earlier, the idea of the land of Israel. The land of Israel is the place where the nation of Israel exists. And we understand that Hashem relates to the nation of Israel differently from every other nation. And he says it explicitly throughout the Torah. I will make you a nation of priests and mamlechet kohanim, and a kingdom of priests, he says also at Har Sinai. In other words, we as a nation have a role very different. There are other nations in the world, and they're to be respected, but they don't have the same connection as nations that we do to Hashem. The other peoples in the world connect to Hashem individually. They have an individual connection, but there's not the same kind of thing that we are connected, because not only are we connected as individuals, we're connected as a collective to Hashem. And Hashem speaks to us collectively. And the commandments that are given to us are commandments not just for individuals, but for the collective nation. And this is something very different from other nations in the world. Okay? Any questions about this? Because I'm weaving some kind of deep points, but I want to make sure that they're clear.
No, I was thinking.
Yes.
Mishpatim is very practical thing.
Yes.
So, I read Meshillah Sharim, but I was thinking more in terms of spiritual things, how to keep Shabbat or this kind of connection.
Right.
And I never thought that following the law of an Eved makes me closer to Hashem.
That's the point. That's what I want to convey to you. Even the most simple mitzvot that we do, on the lowest level, is connecting us to Hashem and helping Hashem to make his world a better place. We're kind of partners. Our dvekut to Hashem is also a partnership, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu called us into task and said, listen, I want a nation that I can talk to directly and that I can kind of serve. I want that nation to serve as a shepherd, so to speak, to the rest of the nations of the world.
Yeah, but the problem is that today we don't have the supremacy of the Beit Din, and we don't have a Sanhedrin.
Correct.
And so there is the supremacy of the law of the state. So basically, this parasha is something that we will never apply.
Well, that's a very interesting thing. The fact that there is not a Sanhedrin, there's not a top legal body to make things, we don't need one yet, because we have the process. What the Chachamenu, our Chazal, did is they saw that we were getting exiled and the Torah was being forgotten, and they created a system called the Talmud, which is essentially, if you realize, it's a snapshot of the laws of that time. Yes, we need a Sanhedrin. Now that we've come back to the land of Israel, all of a sudden everything changes. Because being in the nation of Israel, in the land of Israel, is a totally, as we say in American English, a totally different ball game. It's a whole different ball game. Because here is where we actually can function on the level that we're supposed to function. And right now we don't have a Sanhedrin. Right now we don't have a leader who is a leader who has Yirat Shamayim, which is perhaps the greatest loss that we can feel right now in our modern day living in the land of Israel. The leadership of this country doesn't believe in Hashem, and doesn't believe in their mitzvot, and doesn't believe in the primacy of the mitzvot. That's a big problem. But that's also going to change. And with it, when that happens, we will have the position for the Sanhedrin, it's ready to go. It's like an engine just waiting to someone to turn on the key, because we have all the things we need for it. We have the physical ability to have it. We have Talmidei Chachamim, great wisdom. And then when that happens, everything starts moving. Right now, it's the Talmud is frozen in time to a certain, and in fact, I learned a section of the Talmud last night, and it says to me, it asks the question, hey, what about this situation? Da 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 da, and the answer is teku. Teku means tie in modern Hebrew, but what it means in the Talmud means
Set aside.
set it aside for another time. All the tekus will be resolved once we have a Sanhedrin, because it's a living, moving thing, and they're going to go over everything and make a decision, and that's it. So, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't operate, and we don't have the same operative procedure going on. We do, and it's also, and it does connect us to Hashem, but that'll be on a higher level for sure. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah. No, it's just no. Of course, it makes sense, but the problem is that we are on a topic about something that at the moment is not doable.
But it is doable, because every mitzvah you do is connecting you as an individual and you as the klal. Both you and the individual and you and the nation of Israel are connected more to Hashem.
No, okay, but since we don't have any more.
So I see what you're saying. In other words, the idea of I look at that like this. First of all, think about this. Let's ask a question. Do you think there will be the laws of slavery? There's a whole series of developed laws of slavery. There's an entire section of the Shulchan Aruch on the laws of slavery. Do you think that will be applicable in the future?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I don't know.
I don't know, but
we don't know, but I don't think so. The laws of indentured servant, maybe. This is a different story. This is a Jewish person who was basically selling his work so that he can pay back debts, for example. But us owning people, this is not owning people, what we're talking about here at all.
Yeah.
Owning people, I don't think that's real anymore. But that's because society has moved. And the Sanhedrin will work its way around that very well when the time comes.
But technically speaking, if you have a mortgage, you were to pay your debt. So
yes, that's a real thing. It's better than sitting in a prison and the society paying for a person to sit in jail and do nothing. If a person could work, they call it public service sometimes. Sometimes they do public service. That idea is very clear. The idea of an indentured servant still exists. But the idea of ownership of people, I think, is an anathema to most people today. And that just means that if that's so, then there'll be no need for those laws. But it doesn't mean that they're wrong. Right? What was your question?
I'm just trying to understand for myself. I've had this question.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how the purpose of the mitzvot are there to connect us.
Mm-hmm.
But the mitzvot themselves, are they something enjoyable in and of themselves, or they just lead to a different goal? For instance, I think about like with exercise. Like for some people, like they love lifting weights,
right,
and that's healthy.
Yes.
But some people will just lift weights because it's just healthy and they don't really enjoy it.
Right.
So is the purpose of the mitzvot there to give us enjoyment also, or is it really just for this higher purpose of the connection to Hashem?
I think it depends upon you. I think it depends upon me. It depends upon us. That is to say, how do we relate to, if you think in the morning, and this is, by the way, taught in various circles, if you think in the morning when you're putting on a tefillin and you think, whoa, I am doing a fundamental mitzvah that is connecting me to Hashem and connecting the nation to Hashem and is part of tikkun ha'olam, fixing the world, which is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. There's huge pleasure in that. Kind of depends upon how you look at it. Right? It depends upon what's going on here. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I think also, you can say the same thing about lifting weights. Like, what am I doing? You're thinking about the end goal, but at the end of the day, person just might not like lifting heavy things, versus another form of exercise that they might inherently enjoy more.
Right. So I would imagine that for each individual, there's different levels of mitzvot. That the mitzvot that one does and gets benefit from them and gets pleasure from them, and some that don't. But that doesn't mean that you don't do the mitzvah, right?
Right.
Whereas in weightlifting, I mean,
You do a different form of exercise, maybe.
yeah. Though there is something to be said for a person who's strengthening his person, his body, and health. That it's a mitzvah also, and it can be understood that way. But if it bothers him to do that, then there should be another way to do it. And there is no direct mitzvah in the Torah to say lift weights, right? We don't have such a thing. But it could fall under the rubric of take good care of yourself, lishmor al atzmecha, to guard yourself, to be healthy. Absolutely. So there's leeway here. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But people are drawn to the mitzvot that they get pleasure out of. But this is saying there's a way of thinking that says you can get pleasure out of all mitzvot if you can't understand what they are. If you understand how you interact with them and how they interact with the world, then there's pleasure in all mitzvot. Right? Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. So I guess as a baseline,
yes,
we just do it because we view it as a form of health, even if we don't enjoy it per se, even though that's not the goal.
I see. You're comparing. You're saying.
Yeah, I'm just comparing.
Yes,
not that
yes.
mitzvah to exercise, but I'm just wondering if we compare doing mitzvot as if we just view it as healthy, as just like the right thing to do as a baseline, and then, or should we actually be getting enjoyment from the actual mitzvah itself?
That goes back to my answer before, which is depends upon how you look at it. If you look at a mitzvah and say, hey, I am doing something that is so special and so unusual, and I'm doing it because I have the intent of giving pleasure to the Creator, right? Because there's pleasure. He set it up in such a way that this is His will. Here's an example. Someone said this to me not long ago. Your father, for instance, we all have fathers. Either they're with us or not with us, doesn't matter. When your father asks you to do something, doesn't it give two things? As the son, don't you feel an obligation because you know that it's giving him pleasure? And does that even give you pleasure, that you're giving your father pleasure? I mean, think about it. If your father asked you to do something, you'll do it in most cases, unless you have a very bad relationship with your father. But if you have a normal relationship with your father, you want to do what he asks you to do. And at the same time, he wants you to do what he asks you to do, right? It's a dual thing. So that's a way of looking at mitzvot also. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. And we don't even need to understand the entire connection, how this changes the world and all that kind of stuff. It's not so relevant. This is the will of the Creator. I am doing the Creator's will. That itself is something to feel good about. How's that for a way of looking at it? You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So as an example, you can think of it, that can be very powerful. Especially when mitzvahs are hard to do. It's hard to get up early in the morning and daven sometimes. But we have a mitzvah to do so. So if we look at it as doing God's will, maybe it gives us a little bit more incentive to do it. Right? Okay. So we stopped at just the beginning, where Rav Kook says, he echoes what's being said in Mesilat Yesharim. So let's look down at the second paragraph. And he says, Kishetamik od bioter, if you dig in, let's say, you dig in deeper, he says, you will see shehatachlit ha'amitit hi hadvekut b'Shem Yitbarach. He says, the actual end game is dvekut. We use that word again. The attachment. You're attaching yourself to Hashem. Right? Whatever that means. Ki rak ze hu hatov. In other words, and there's a logic to this which says, listen, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of all good, then you're attaching yourself, you're connecting to him, you're doing his will is the real good. It's actually the definition of good. Because he's the creator. He created good. He knows what's good. Right? So that's what's being said here. Okay? Then, v'chol zulat zeh. This is answering you. What's your name again, sir? Yehuda. This is kind of discussing a little bit about what you just said. V'chol zulat zeh sheyachshvuhu b'nei adam latov. Everything that people think is good, right? Hey, this is great. This is a great movie. Okay, this is a great movie. Man, it's the best, and it deserves an Oscar. All right? He says, everything that you think is good, Eino ela hevel v'shav nit'eh. It's hevel is like it's breath, empty breath, and nothing, and mistaken nothingness. It's pretty strong. In other words, hey, I think that this pen, is the best thing in the world, but if it isn't connected to Dveikut Hashem, it's a problem, because the source of good is Hashem. That's what the Rav Kook is saying here. Now, I think it's very, very important with this kind of stuff to say like this. These are very high concepts that I'm projecting to you. Nobody succeeds completely at doing all this stuff as it should be done. That's not possible. But by osek bazeh, to be involved in doing these things, lifts you up nonetheless. And so the more you try, the higher you get. But don't expect to have that level of being able to look at them and say, oh, this table, if it isn't being used for learning or something like that, then it's no good. That's a very, very high kind of level. But the idea is helpful in helping you serve Hashem the way you want to serve Hashem, right? Keeping in mind that serving Hashem is the greatest internal pleasure that a person can experience. Which, by the way, I just want to point out, and this is I didn't include some talks about this, but the question is, where do we get the reward for these things that we're doing? Where do we experience that total high? In this world?
It depends on the mitzvah.
It depends.
It depends on the mitzvah.
Right. But some of it is to be aware of that there's this concept of Olam Haba. Olam Haba is the world that is coming. And guess what? These ideas are not clear to everyone. There are different opinions about what it means. There are different traditions. But keep in the back of your mind that you might not experience that total high until Ad Mea Ve'asrim, until 120 years, after 120 years, right? Because that's the place where you can think of it this way. The Olam Haba is the spiritual world. We're in a physical world. This is made up of atoms and electrons and subatomic particles. It's a physical world. But the world that's spiritual, that in this world there's also spirituality. We know that. But the world that is all spirituality is what we call the world to come. What does that mean? How we get there? That's a discussion for another day. But keep in mind that that's where you might be experiencing. If you're not experiencing it in this world for doing certain mitzvot, maybe in the world to come you'll experience it differently. I mean, that shouldn't be your benchmark. Like, oh, okay, I'll just be waiting for the world to come. No, we should be enjoying life in this world, in this physical world. And it's not only okay, it's part of our purpose here. But the world where everything is spirituality means that it's a different yardstick, right? But something to keep in mind. Does that help also answer you a little bit?
Yeah.
Like in the future, okay. So Rav Kook just said something pretty wild. He says, listen, everything, the definition of good is not what you think is good. The definition of good is what Hashem thinks is good for us to do, okay? Then we'll look at the third paragraph. Does someone want to read it? Yuda, you want to read it?
Sure. Which one?
Ve'anu, the third
ואנו
paragraph.
תובעים את עצמנו אחת, שהדבקות האלוקית הזאת
Be'atzma,
בעצמה תהיה משוערת בקרבנו בצורתה הטהורה מכל שמץ
egoism.
אגואיזם
Mhm.
נשפל. ושנית, הדבקות האלוקית במובנה העליון, אוצר הטוב המקורי צריך שיעלה את כל מה שחשבוהו בני אדם לטוב, שיהיה באמת טוב.
Oh, so he's kind of refining what he said above. He says, and we have to kind of require of ourselves. Ve'anu tovim et atzmenu. First thing, שהדבקות האלוקית הזאת, this דבקות to Hashem that we've been talking about, בעצמה תהיה משוערת בקרבנו בצורתה הטהורה מכל שמץ egoism נשפל. That is to say, and it's kind of hard to understand this, but we want that dvekut to be free of all me. It's me going here. In other words, I guess it's saying that the focus on dvekut is on Hashem, not on ourselves, right? Because he's saying all egoism put aside. So the focus of serving Hashem is on Hashem. That's what he's saying. Then the second thing, Hashenit, hadvekut ha'elokit b'muvana ha'elyon, in the highest level of understanding dvekut, otzar hatov ha'mekori צריך שיעלה את כל מה שחשבוהו בני אדם לטוב, שיהיה באמת טוב. Now he's saying, this connects to this idea of, by doing the mitzvot, we are taking things that we think are tov and turning them into real tov. Because again, we said that tov is what Hashem is defining as tov. This is kind of a complicated concept. But he's saying we got to make sure that we're using our mitzvot to lift up some of the mundane things in the world and make them better. See that? To make things better. Kol ma shechashvuhu b'nei adam, everything that people thought was good, it should really be good. Which means that not just, I guess he's saying it's not just an egoistic, it's for me and I don't care about anyone else when we do things. Interesting concept. V'lo od, he says, he continues, v'lo od, ela gam kol ma sheyashvuhu b'nei adam l'ra. This is my title says Rav Kook's Chidush. This is now Rav Kook's Chidush, which is really wild. And it's going to stretch our minds a little bit to understand what's being said. V'lo od, not only that, ela gam kol ma sheyashvuhu b'nei adam l'ra, everything that people think is bad, okay? צריך שיהיה נודע שהוא טוב. What does that mean, guys? It must be known that it is good. What, bad is good? What are we talking about here?
In the bigger picture.
You just put your finger on the whole thing. We are people, guys. We're limited creatures. We're limited by intellect, we're limited by ability, we're limited by energy, we're limited by everything. When we're looking at the world, we're seeing, as I think my daughter said, we're seeing little pieces of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle. And when you're looking at little pieces, it means that you don't know what's going on over here. And you don't understand how this piece actually connects to the whole or connects to other pieces in the whole. We don't understand that. We don't. We're limited creatures. We're just creatures, blood and flesh and blood, right? But if we understand, and we are given something as human beings which is different from every other creature in the world, we can understand that there is a bigger picture. You can ask a dog, right? Hey, dog, do you understand the big picture? He doesn't even won't know what you're talking about. But at least we understand that out there is a big picture. That makes us different from every other thing in the world. So what now Rav Kook is talking about is we need to know, we have to kind of tell ourselves that even the bad is good. Let's see what he says. Pretty wild, huh? It says, "Mipnei shebe'emet ein ra ki im tov." In truth, there is no evil, only good. It's difficult to accept, but I said, why? Because we can't see that. We can't see that Hamas fits into something else that we don't know. We don't know why Hamas is Hamas, why it exists in the world. Oh, but we're going to get to an important point. He's saying on the biggest level, we have to understand in our minds that even the bad has a purpose because God created it. Right? Who created bad? The devil? That's what some people think, by the way. There are certain faiths in the world that think that there's an alternate reality of a different force that creates things and that's actually in conflict with God himself. It's called dualism. And there are faiths, if you listen carefully out there, you'll hear people talking like that. We don't buy that for a second. We don't buy that there's anything in the world outside of God's direct control that he created, that he manages. And we also believe, and this is a very, very important point, that essentially the Satan, the devil, is a servant of God. And we see this clearly, if you look carefully, in the book of Job. Have you ever studied that book?
Yeah.
We see how God relates to the Satan and how Satan relates to God. He's a servant of God. He's doing his job. And he is not the boss. And it's a very, very important thing, I think, for people to understand. We have only one boss. There is no other boss outside of Hashem. Hashem he created everything, he manages everything, and there's no one who challenges Hashem. No one can challenge Hashem. Hashem is creating the Satan for his purposes. Okay? Now, we will see in a minute. Rav Kook will now say, Omnam, however, this is the fifth paragraph. Okay? Omnam, כדי להגיע אל האור העליון של השלמות הנשפט, in order to get to that, we're talking about that kind of high, that highest light of perfection that we are drawn to do, okay? We can't just say, oh, no problem, there's evil and just walk away from it. No. He says, Hatov HaMuchlat shel HaDveikut HaElokit, the absolute good of Dveikut to Hashem, right? What does he say? Tzrichim lehakdim et hamusar hama'asi. Oh, before we start messing with this stuff, we have to bring into the picture musar. What is musar? Ethics. Well said. Musar is ethics, meaning in ethics, you don't say, oh, even the bad is good, and that's it. No, sir. Ethics say the bad is bad and the good is good, and we got to deal with the bad and we got to deal with the good. Right? That's what he's saying. He's saying, before you, but let's understand that on the highest level, what he said a moment ago is true. Everything is good because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is absolute good. So it can't be that evil is, or unless you say evil is outside HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that doesn't make sense either because HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything. So, but before you get to that level, you have to deal with Musar. Musar says ethics, what's good, what's bad, how do we deal with these things, right? And then he says, Hamafrid et hatov min hara. In ethics, you divide the good from the bad. You don't pretend that you don't just say everything's good and that's it. You have to know, recognize the bad. You divide the good from the bad. V'yesh esek im hayisod hara ki im davar shel mitziyut. He says, and in fact, you have to relate to bad things as if it were real. But we keep in mind, it's not real. It's just an illusion. all evil is essentially an illusion. And when you have that thought in everything you do, it really lifts you up. Because you don't let bad worry you so much. And you don't have yi'ush. You don't start saying, oh, everything's so bad, I'm just giving up and going to Poland or something, right? No. You understand that everything is good, but we have to struggle against the bad. But ultimately, everything is good.
It would be nice to know why.
Nice to go to Hawaii instead?
No, it would be nice to know why.
To know why.
You know.
I heard you say go to Hawaii. Let's go to Hawaii, man. We'll just get on a plane and hang out on the beach and forget all this stuff. No, I don't think so.
No, what I'm saying is.
No, I hear you want to know why.
Why? It's something bad happen, Okay, it's good. We said the bracha because I think there is a bracha when something bad happens.
Yes.
And it's, but let me know why I had this trouble.
Well, what happens, let me give you an interesting thought. What happens when you think you know why, as some people do, as we all want to do, is you bring a person up to a divine level. And then it's a short step from thinking of a person at a divine level to worshiping that person as God. That God forbid God exists in human form. And there are many, many faiths in the world, and even cults. Cults function as if their cult leader is a god, essentially. They might not say it exactly, but that's what we get. This is total nonsense. And it misleads billions of people on the planet from serving Hashem as he's supposed to be served, as he wants to be served. Right? Doesn't it make sense if HaKadosh Baruch Hu has said to us, I want you to do this, then you should be serving him that way and no other way. Not what you think is the right way to serve Hashem, right? So you're poking at that. The answer is we don't know. And you know what? Guess what? Nothing wrong with not knowing. Nothing wrong with being a human being. I don't know. And human beings make mistakes too, right? There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. You do your best. If you're doing your best, then you're doing the best you can. And that's good enough. Right? So it's a very important point you raised. But think about that. There are billions of people on the planet that worship a person as a god. And the Torah starts by saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't raise any object in the world and worship it as divine. Only me, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No object, no person, no stone, no piece of metal, no painting. But I haven't figured that. That's a question. Why did they do that? I don't know. Anyway, last thing we'll say here, as we're reading, it says, כדי להגיע אל האור העליון של השלמות הנשפת, הטוב המוחלט של הדבקות האלוקית, צריכים להקדים את המוסר המעשי. We've got to have that musar. המפריד את הטוב מן הרע, which divides good from the bad. ויש עסק, he's saying, and we can relate to it as a fundamental principle that the היסוד הרע, the fundamental of evil, is as if it was a real thing, but we really know inside that it isn't. That's the kind of level that we're trying to get to. Okay? ומזה, says Rav Kook, באים לאור העליון. In that way, we arrive at that ultimate light. של הדבקות האלוקית, of attachment to Hashem, העליונה, the highest level. שהוא תכלית הטוב. Boom. That's the purpose of good, is to do that. So in other words, I think what this is telling us is we have to serve Hashem in a particular way. But we have to keep in mind that we don't know everything. He calls the shots, but we have what to do. And our focus should be on what we do And again, I go back to that point, which is if you're doing mitzvot and think in mind that this is the vekut to Hashem, it changes everything. It changes everything. And the real tzaddikim of the world, they function on this level. Everything they're doing is part of their worship of Hashem. That takes work. There's no one's born into that. That takes work, understanding this stuff. But at the same time, you could say, well, that's too big for me. I don't need to deal with that. Leave me alone. I mean, I'm just trying to go day to day. The answer is it's not too big for you. Because you also can plug in and it'll lift you up as much as you can do. It's kind of up to you. How much do you intend to apply these principles to your daily life? But see, I'm going to recommend, take a moment and do a mitzvah sometime and say to yourself, I'm doing a mitzvah for the sake of the mitzvah. Remember, have you ever heard that term? Lishma, to do a mitzvah lishma. That's what we're talking about here, guys. To do a mitzvah lishma for its name means I'm not doing it because I'll get more money, or I'm not doing it because I'll go to sleep earlier, or anything, something. I'm doing it because it's a mitzvah. This mitzvah is bringing me closer to Hashem and bringing the world towards perfection. That's why I'm doing the mitzvah. If you can focus on that, it changes the whole ballgame, as I said earlier. Make sense? More questions, guys, on this stuff? You're certainly welcome to any questions you have. Because this is not really easy stuff. I don't think you get shiurim like this too often, do you? I don't get them either, so. Seder? What's our next topic? I have to think. It all comes from the Parsha, but there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of stuff going on. And just keep in mind that let's just do a little elevating for a minute and understand that we are here in the land of Israel as Bnei Yisrael. Either we're Bnei Yisrael at this moment or we're on our way to being Bnei Yisrael. That's not the point. We're here in the land of Israel as the nation of Israel in the time of the Geulah, when everything that's going around us doesn't make sense, but that doesn't matter because we do know what makes sense. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge. We know, according to Chazal, we know for sure that we are in the period of the redemption, whether it's the beginning, the middle, the end, and that's also irrelevant. But to be here, this alone could, as sometimes I tell people, you could dance down the street all day if you just had that in your mind. Right? What a gift. Think about our ancestors, generations and generations ago, just dreaming that maybe one day, somewhere, somehow, we get back to Eretz Yisrael and Jerusalem, and it was just an idea. For us, we're in it every single day. It's a good idea to keep that in mind in what we're doing, I think. I think it'll help us all. All right? Thank you so much for being with me. I think I'm ending at the right time.
Okay.
Yes.